Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Legendary Lords in Warhammer 3. Specifically, Legendary Lords that once used to be amazing, but given the dynamics of the game, are less so nowadays. Now, these Legendary Lords are still in their own right powerful, undeniably so, but they just don't quite work as well within the current game meta. So to start off with, let's talk about Taurox, the Brass Bull. When Taurox was introduced, it was amazing. The Beastman rework was superb within the context of Warhammer 2. Nowadays, Taurox still works much the same way. He still has the ability of getting a lot of campaign movement range. He still goes on a rampage. He still gets a bunch of those benefits. That's great, which means he's still the best Legendary Lord of the Beastmen. But the problem is the Beastmen themselves just feel very outdated as a race. Having a race that is built on the idea of unit capacity, even if units are recruited for free, but unit capacity and very limited unit capacity at that, just doesn't quite work so well within the current game context. I mean, it's gotten to the point of silliness with the UI over here for the various Beastmen units. So maybe that's something they should update. But yes, you do have limitations in terms of unit variety. You can improve this, but you're using the same resource, Dread, for everything. You're using it for unit caps, you're using it for lords and heroes, so to confederate legendary lords, to increase your hero capacity, and then you're using it as well for various upgrades. Now that means that later on in a campaign, Beastmen are ridiculously strong, because you can recruit lords and heroes up to rank 15 instantly in higher level horde armies, and you can guarantee confederation with all other legendary lords provided you own the Beastman race pack as well. But all the same, using the same resource for everything means that your early game in particular is going to suffer, and you're just going to be recruiting a bunch of Ungor raiders, which is not exactly a fun dynamic. Then we could talk about the research tree as well for the Beastmen. Very limited, could certainly use an update, could be a lot more interesting than it currently is. But then on top of that, when we're talking about the Beastmen, the problem is with their limitation of diplomacy. So Beastmen do not have many diplomatic options, with the exception of Chaos, and even then it's still a very, very limited level of diplomacy. And diplomacy was one of the main changes that Creative Assembly brought in Warhammer 3. So the diplomatic overhaul of Warhammer 3 made the game substantially better. But with diplomacy playing a much bigger role, or being far more useful, the fact that Beastmen don't have regular diplomacy available in their campaign and have severe limitations on that does mean that the Beastmen as a whole have been left behind. Then we can talk about the overall game pacing, the just pacing of the campaign. So what ends up happening in the Beastman campaign in general, including Taurox, is you struggle somewhat in your early game, though not really, because you can ambush everyone, and then you just demolish everyone in your path. And there's no nuance, there's no variety, there's no depth to it. And suffice to say, if Beastmen were a prelude to Khorne, I would say Khorne is just much better right now at that kind of, fast-moving playstyle. They have a lot more unit variety, they play better, they have diplomacy, surprisingly so. I mean, you would think Khorne wouldn't have diplomacy, but Khorne is actually pretty good at diplomacy, all things considered. Yes, I know, hilarity. But that means Khorne is just much better at playing the campaign map, so Taurox just feels irrelevant at this point in Warhammer 3, and he shouldn't be. Have Grom the Paunch. When he was introduced, amazing, powerful Legendary Lord. He still is powerful, but right now in Warhammer 3, his campaign just doesn't work all that well. A big part of that has to do with the climate situation that Grom has to deal with. Within his starting location, he only has one settlement that's suitable climate, and then he is surrounded by temperate climate, which is unpleasant. Even for greenskins, which are a very powerful race and can handle a lot of things, this ends up being a significant downside in Grom's campaign, which reduces variety. And then there's the fact that you have Bretonnia, and Bretonnia in particular is not really a great area of the campaign map to deal with. There are some mountains, of course, over here with the Northern Green Mountains, but all the same, just not great. You do have Ulthuan as suitable climate, or rather you have Temperate Island, but even when you deal with Ulfon, let's say you play a campaign, you conquer Ulfon, you deal with that, and then what's there to play in this campaign? Not really all that much, actually. Because every other Greenskin Legendary Lord is very far away, so you don't have the fun aspect of the Confederation situation that everyone else has to deal with, really. You play any other Greenskin campaign, with the exception of perhaps Warzag, but his natural expansion path does lead them north. But you play any other Greenskin campaign, and it's not as terrible as it is for Grom. So between climate and distance from him and everyone else, as well as the natural campaign flow of this one, you end up with a less than stellar campaign situation to be dealing with. Now, one could argue that the Cauldron itself can really make up for a lot of the deficiency Grom has. Yes, the Cauldron absolutely is amazing and gives you a lot of different powers in a campaign. Undeniably so. But here's the thing about the Cauldron. The Cauldron is kind of annoying to deal with because unlocking these various ingredients requires you to go around the world collecting them or just waiting for the hack to spawn when she's actually not bugged out, which, by the way, can and does happen. So starting with the tier 1 element, having those limitations in a campaign, having all those limits placed on you over and over and over again, and then dealing with this mechanic doesn't lend itself to a great campaign. Certainly the power is there in long-term potential, but I would say he's the worst Greenskin campaign to play by far, and he wasn't the worst Greenskin campaign to play previously. Again, the power is there. I'm not saying it isn't, but because you can literally print money with ocean clams and, you know, anything else really. But again, it is just that kind of dynamic that you're dealing with in a campaign over and over and over again. Just, you know, trying to unlock ingredients, trying to get all that fun stuff, trying to do all of that, and it just ends up feeling lackluster compared to where it should be as a campaign. Like, Grom should be awesome, but unfortunately he is not really awesome. He is part of a DLC you should own if you're playing Greenskins, just because of the Giant River troll hags and stone trolls, but that's kind of it. He could use, like, he would benefit a lot from a climate situation and a terrain change to Bretonia, but it's also the campaign dynamics that do end up hurting Grom quite a bit. Then we have Eltharion the Grim. His issue has to do with his unique campaign mechanic of getting Warden supplies, and that's a pretty big deal. But first off, you do have to make a choice on whether or not you want to give up Ivres or maintain control. Generally speaking, you want to maintain control because you do need Tor of Rest for campaign victory conditions, so giving it up is just self-sabotage, honestly. But that means you're playing a parallel campaign over here in Ulfon. It's not bad, and certainly you can allow Tyrion and Alariel to do a lot of the heavy lifting until Nakari shows up and ruins your day. But all the same, that is not a great dynamic having to deal with multiple starting position, especially since he can't go home, and he is heavily encouraged to fight Greenskins because of Warden supplies. Not quite, though, because you don't earn Warden supplies by fighting Greenskins, you earn Warden supplies by capturing enemy lords in battle, and then using those Warden supplies for various benefits over here. But that's kind of the problem. In order to acquire a lord, you need to capture him using the Warden Cage, but if you auto-resolve, chances are pretty damn high that you're most of the time not going to capture a lord. Over here I got lucky and I did capture him, but yes, you need to capture a lord, you need to then ideally interrogate him, and then either execute or indoctrinate said lord. So you're not even necessarily killing lords in battle, you're capturing them. Well, you're using Warden Cage when they're low HP, and then you're capturing them in the course of your campaign. But it's not a good mechanic to be playing with throughout the course of your campaign. It feels very frustrating. And this is one of the primary reasons why Eltharion is never played in a multiplayer campaign, because no one is going to allow you to just fight all those manual battles, and if you don't get Warden supplies, then you're not even achieving your campaign victory conditions, and that is a pretty big problem in his campaign. He also starts with nothing over here in the Southern Badlands, which is annoying. And then even talking about the Badlands, he doesn't have mountain climate as a viable one. So even here in this area, he actually ends up being lackluster compared to so many other legendary lords just because of the climate situation, because not having mountains does hurt you a bit. But then further on top of that specific problem, he doesn't have a good way of navigating this, because you see, having underway tunneling stance is actually quite crucial in a campaign area like this. Unless you're Khorne, but then again, Khorne is just Khorne, so he gets a pass. But let me be very clear, even Skarbrand does suffer because of his starting position over here in the Southern Badlands, where he does start next to Khemri. But again, he's Skarbrand. He can get away with a lot of things that many other people can't. So that ends up being the problem. It's a shame too, because Eltharion does have a lot of cool and unique units that only he can use in his campaign with the Mistwalker stuff, but just doesn't end up working out in your campaign. Like, I would love to play a campaign and, you know, unlock all of this shit, but it's just such a limiting, annoying, frustrating situation, and it's quite a shame, really, because, again, Eltharion is an awesome character. He has awesome units that only he has access to, but, yeah, just not a great dynamic to be dealing with as Eltharion. If you want to use those units, there's a mod, I believe, that unlocks them for everyone else, or just gives you Legendary Lord mechanics, but yeah, that's just the thing about Eltharion. He is very lackluster compared to the other Legendary Lords of the High Elves. I mean, say what you will about Telariel, yes, her campaign dynamic is kind of trash, and it has always been trash, but at least she doesn't have that kind of situation. Oh, either fight every battle manually against enemy lords, or get pushed further behind compared to everyone else. And even then, when you fight manual battles, the Warden's Cage is such a gimmick bullshit. The reason it's such a gimmick bullshit is you, one, trivialize the power of enemy lords in battle, so even Skarbrand ends up being far less of a threat, assuming he even is a threat under AI control. But then you have to do it in a specific time once a character's already low HP, so you can capture them. But you can always just use it as a debuff, a free debuff against enemy lords. So you trivialize so many battle encounters just because of Warden's Cage. So that too is not a great dynamic to be dealing with. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Stay tuned for more.